Basically everyone's familiar with the basic greenskins, orcs and goblins in particular. Many people are also aware of the more elite versions of them, these being the black orcs created by the chaos dwarves and the night goblins created by hallucinogenic mushrooms. But today we're going to take a look at the more minor variations among the greenskins. Some of these you may have heard of, others you probably won't have heard of, but anyways, kick back with a glass of milk and let's get started.
Wow.
Alright, I should specify before we get started, although squigs are technically part of the greenskins, we're not going to take a look at them here, maybe one day down the line. Anyways, let's get started with two more sets of greenskins you've probably at least got a passing awareness of, these being the two tribal greenskin variants, Savage Orcs and Forest Goblins. Savage Orcs are exactly what they sound like, and exactly what Total Warhammer describes them as. Orcs that are even more primitive and stupid than standard orcs, and that's saying something. What these orcish Luddites lack in technology, they make up for in sheer brute force and stupidity, and I mean it about that last part. Because Savage Orcs are dumb enough to believe that their lack of technology actually makes them superior, their innate magical talents makes them actually superior compared to standard orcs. Okay, whatever, you're aware that the Savage Orcs are in Total Warhammer, you say. Well, the Savage Orcs are not entirely represented in Total Warhammer. While we do have the Error Boys, Big Uns, Boar Boys, and the default Savage Orcs, we still lack the Savage Orc Boss, Big Boss, and Shaman. And while Wurzag is in the game, another famous Savage Orc is missing, that being Grak Beastbasha, a monster-hunting Savage Orc chieftain. But the Savage Orcs are mostly still represented in game. What are almost completely unrepresented are the Forest Goblins. These greenskins are even more different and alien than the Savage Orcs are. See, while the Savage Orcs might be Luddites, they still ultimately behave like greenskins. They have Waz, they worship Gork and Mork. Not so with the Forest Goblins, who stick completely to the forests and worship the Spider God first and foremost. That they worship a Spider God at all is really not surprising, given that the vast majority of their culture is centered around arachnids. See, unlike normal goblins who typically stick to underground caverns and mountainous caves, the Forest Goblins, as their name might imply, live in the far-flung forests. As a result of this, they're unable to access metals and instead make use of bones, wood, and arachnids. Their shamans allow themselves to be bitten by venomous spiders in order to commune with the spider god known as the Feaster from Beyond, which I guess makes the Forest Goblins the precursors to the Gene Stealer cults of 40k? Kinda neat, I guess. Anyways, speaking of the cults, these new shaman-led Forest Goblins lead what are now known as the Spider Cult. Those shamans, thanks to the litany of spider bites they've suffered, have become exceedingly adept at magic as far as greenskins go and are completely immune to pain. A couple of the Forest Goblin units are already in the game, those being the Forest Goblin Spider Riders and the Arachnarok Spider, but in between those two extremes are a bunch of different units. So Spider Hatchlings would be the cheap chafe unit of the Forest Goblins meant to kill the opponent in a flurry of poisonous attacks. Giant Spiders are the ones you've sort of already seen in the game, but they're also available as an unmounted unit which act as infantry hunters, fairly quick and able to cripple enemies with poisonous attacks. Gigantic spiders sit between Arachnaroks and giant spiders. They're big enough to take on most foes, but they are not quite as large as the Arachnaroks are. But wait, there's more. In addition to the Forest Goblin variants of most of the Goblin troops, there's also a few more bits and pieces that also make sense in the roster. The Grey Biter Spider is massive, akin to Arachnaroks, but would likely give up the anti-large bonus for some anti-infantry fun instead. Silkins are very small spiders, they're almost akin to spiderlings, but they could be differentiated by giving them a web-based stun ability and being at a tier 2 rather than tier 1. And if CA is allowed to pull from Age of Sigmar, which kind of on the fence about whether or not they are, Scutlings were quite literally goblin-spider hybrids, and they were every bit as cool as that sounds. Alright, but basically everyone knows about those two. You didn't come here for that. What about the less common stuff? Well, let's work our way down, starting with the most well-known stuff and ending on the super obscure stuff. I'll briefly touch upon three just now that we will not be discussing today, these being Snotlings, Gnoblars, and Hobgoblins. Snotlings are already mostly in-game, or at least the pump wagons are, while the Snotlings themselves are just really weak, dumber goblins. They're even weaker than the Gnoblars are. Gnoblars we recently touched upon, so there's no point going over their roster again here, and the Hobgoblins we've spoken about briefly before, and we will do a proper deep dive into them in the future. I will also say any of the subspecies for the above three, such as Blood Gnoblars and Goblars, they're also going to be off this list for the exact same reason. But anyways, Hill Goblins are the next thing on our list then, and they are giants among the goblins, standing as tall as an orc and being about as strong as one. That said, they aren't as foolish as to pick a fight with orcs, as they're typically evenly matched, while the hill goblins much prefer to pick on their lessers. They can be armed with a sword, sword and shield, great sword or dual sword, and can be had in armored and unarmored variants. They can be found in mercenary bands such as the Southern Realms and Greenskin forces, and would be a higher tier option relative to most goblins. Fire kobolds are goblins that would essentially play as a cross between a goblin and a lizardman salamander. They are very resistant to fire and can even shoot fire themselves when needed, though they can also be armed with hand weapons, shields, and spears, and are available once again in armored and unarmored variants. They would be recruitable only by greenskins and could even be made into a WoW-only recruitable unit. Troglogobs are yet another variant of goblin, this time an aquatically focused one rather than a fire-focused one. They would possess the aquatic trait and are primarily a ranged-focused infantry squad. They can be had as javelin throwers and archers, with their ranged attacks possessing the poison debuff, and they're also skirmishers, so firing while moving would be very appropriate for them. The javelin variants would of course be anti-large range units, while the archers would be anti-infantry ranged units. They would be an option for greenskins and possibly the Noblar Horde if the latter is ever to come to existence. Alright, but let's mix it up a little and go for a non-goblin pick for our next thing, with the Iron Orcs. These crazed lunatics combine the insanity-powered strength of the Savage Orcs with the high-end weaponry of the Black Orcs. In fact, their armor is quite literally fused into them. They are always bound to have it. They are heavily armored and are typically found wielding a big choppa, which is a great axe with excellent armor piercing, but fairly low melee attack speed. I would, however, also add them in as a second cavalry option, mounted atop Hagronyms. They are bloodthirsty, psychotic steeds that are more intelligent than the orc that's riding them is. These cavalry would be quicker than orc boar boys and would likely be a little more damaging in sustained combat, but would sacrifice a little bit of charge bonus and would suffer from frenzy. Contained only to Carcassonne, they're primarily featured in Black Orc warbands, as the Black Orcs are the only greenskin that can really get them to settle down and obey. Alright, on to our final and my own personal favorite entry, the Dust Goblins. These undead gobbles were resurrected in Nehekara, and as a result, they play like a three-way split between skeletons, skink skirmishers, and goblins. They will never rout, and instead they crumble if their leadership is broken, and they also cause fear while being immune to psychology, much like every other undead unit does. They are armed with blowpipes which can fire while moving, which makes them handle quite a bit like skink skirmishers. And then one thing I would personally tweak is making their leaders, which are normally called morbids, into a higher tiered variant armed with poison attacks at range, owing to the fact that Dust Goblins are known to coat their rounds in scorpion venom. They would be available to both Tomb Kings and Greenskins, at fairly low tiers for both. But that's a wrap on this one. So what possible variants are you most excited for, and why is it the Dust Goblins? Also, let me know if I missed anything obvious down in the comments. I'm going to try and get a video out as soon as the Wood Elf DLC gets officially announced, but I'm expecting it'll probably go out as soon as I'm at work shortly after this video launches, so just understand I will have to, cater around my work schedule rather than vice versa. Anyways, I want to thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next time.